Welcome everybody to the Hidden Treasure Seminar Series, co-organised by Monash University and the Asia Pacific branch of the Ibn Arabi Society. My name is Anne-Marie, and together with my friend Adoan, we will serve as the co-hosts of today's seminar on Ibn Arabi, one of the most influential mystics in world history. Last month, Stephen Hertenstein delivered the inaugural talk, exploring the idea of opening, with its wide-ranging meanings spanning from a banal sensory experiences to metaphysics. Today, we'll have the pleasure to hear from Pablo Beneito, who will talk about letters, numbers, and lexical roots in Ibn Arabi and his school. Next month, we'll host Jane Clark, who will focus on Ibn Arabi's idea of perpetual progress, making some fruitful comparisons with Christian mysticism. Our seminars will consistently meet on the first Saturday of every month, so please mark your calendars if you haven't yet. For those of you who are new to Zoom, our session will be composed of a 40-minute presentation by Pablo Beneito, followed by a 20-minute question and answer session with the audience. During his talk, we will mute all participants in order to avoid any possible interruption. Only the speaker and his presentation screen will be recorded. After the talk, we will stop recording and the participants will be able to unmute themselves and ask questions. Please either use the raise your hand option or the chat function to post your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker today. Pablo Beneito is a professor in the Faculty of Letters at the University of Murcia in Murcia, Spain, where Ibn Arabi was born. Pablo serves as the head of the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society Latina, and he has published various works of Ibn Arabi, including Mashahid al-Asrar and Kashf al-Mana. Thank you so much for joining us, Pablo, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, and my thanks to all the organizing committee for this wonderful occasion to join such an audience from the Asian Pacific region. That's really beautiful to see all this interest in Ibn Arabi's work. And yes, indeed, from my terrace, I can see the neighborhood Alberca, where Ibn Arabi was born. So it's really joyful to feel this closeness to his physical birthplace.
Wonderful.
The only screen I will share with you is the screen of your imagination and this beautiful gallery. So I will rather choose to be face to face, and mainly I will try to share some approaches to general principles that I believe will allow us to understand better the treatment of letters, numbers, and roots Ibn Arabi does and provides for us in his works. All humans, we are facing the mystery of reality, and this mysterious nature of reality should be kept in mind because that's a universal situation. So any language, any approach, any symbolical background will provide orientations and ways to contemplate. And this is the main aim of this presentation, of this sharing with you, is to consider the possibility of a loving contemplation of the real. And to consider Ibn Arabi's teachings as precisely the orientation towards this loving contemplation. Since we know that he would say that love is the origin of everything, from love everything emerges, and to love everything returns. In a way, the function of human being, our particular quality in existence, would be precisely to be the receivers and the places of manifestation of consciousness and the idea of bearing witness of the marvels of this process of infinite divine creativity. So with this concept of contemplation in mind, we can better understand the dynamic of interpretation in Ibn Arabi's writings. Of course, when we are dealing with Ibn Arabi, the framework for symbolic expression is always connected to the Quran and to Arabic language. But certainly we are considering now a thinker of the 12th, 13th century in the Mediterranean koine, in the Mediterranean context. So a recurrent image we will always find through his writings is the idea shared by many other thinkers of the Abrahamic tradition of the fact that the creation itself is conceived as a book, as a writing, and humans are considered as well as micro Quran expressions of this universal book. So the macro Quran of the cosmos, the micro Quran of human being, of his heart, and this approach leads us to consider ourselves as interpreters whose aim is to decipher the signs that providentially are manifested in the dynamic of our life. So we know that for Ibn Arabi, at every instant, God's self-disclosure is appearing, manifesting in ourselves and in the horizons in an infinite numbers of ways. And he is always providing for us orientations and keys so that in our heart we might integrate two fundamental dimensions of perception and consciousness. What are those? I was referring to this fascinating mystery of reality, which let us always feel in perplexity the ambivalence of any approach we may have towards knowledge. And in a sense, every disclosure of God in every unique thing of existence at every instant is an ineffable, transcendent expression, which is ambivalent, something that appears to be limited, but in an essential way, essentially everything is completely unique because every manifested thing is an expression of this transcendent uniqueness of the real. So there is nothing to analyze there in terms of separation and distinction, because all this belongs to the realm of ahadiyya, of pure uniqueness, and is beyond any analysis through language, through any possible consideration. And this is this is an aspect, this is a dimension of the contemplation of the heart that feels this marvel and this mystery alive in everything as the essential presence. On the other hand, we have, if this is tansih, the incomparability, on the other hand, we have this dimension of comparability. And within the heart and in the minds, we have the experience of everything being possibly associated, interconnected to anything else through patterns of analogy. So there is a principle of analogy that will be very fundamental to understand all we are going to share about letters and numbers. And this belongs to this realm of tansih, by which, through the theomorphic nature of the human form, every heart has the capability of opening to this inclusiveness in which everything in existence resonates inwardly in our consciousness. So let's say that through this principle of comparability and analogy, everything is connected, everything is resonating, and things come to be known in the particular way of this dimension. If in the one hand we have this uniqueness that is not related to multiplicity, on the other hand we have multiplicity connected in all possible ways. So we think of this medieval thinker, and on the other hand, in a particular context of Islamic thought, of Arabic language, of the Muhammadian revelation. But we all know that we are also studying him as a source of knowledge for universal approaches to reality. Certainly, I'm going to try to show that there is a universal language, inclusive, expanding to all possible languages, at the same time that in Ibn Arabi, the providential privileged language would be certainly the one expressed in Arabic and in the Quran. So we have to think of the Quran as the matrix of the book containing all possible manifestations of reality. And these mysteriously, symbolically, providentially being manifested in a particular book. And this would be the focus of Ibn Arabi, of Ibn Arabi's reflection. But through this concentration in this symbolical framework provided by Islamic revelation, he will open our consciousness to for the application of these principles to any other context, language, and realm in history, in interior life. We know that the attributes, the divine attributes he considers more inclusive are life and knowledge. He would identify the all-inclusive circle of existence with those two attributes that comes together and are unified and expressed, I understand, in the principle of love. Love having not no entity by itself, but being the origin and the end of all experience of knowledge and realization of the attribute of life. A very relevant thing for me in the Abrahamic tradition, fully expressed in Ibn Arabi's teaching, is this idea of life being the universal principle of every manifestation, and the idea also of a personal, of the divine person expressed as the real. So when I talk of the reality, it is implied that it is the real, of course, beyond gender. And this introduces, in contrast with other traditions, the principle of a personal relationship, of an intimate encounter within the heart with this alive person that is expressed in all manifestations. So there is a dialogue, there is a listening and a mutual speech, and this dialogic relationship, I think, is a very essential feature of Abrahamic tradition, where so the reality is not understood as something impersonal, but as something, as somebody, I would say, that with whom we can establish this very personal relationship. Okay, well, you are probably familiar with this passage at the end of Fusus, where Al-Junaid is mentioned when it is the question of the commenting on his saying that the water adopts the color of the recipient. And in this passage, Ibn Arabi develops, as in many other passages, the very special idea of the God created in the beliefs. He goes there as far as to say that every human is the author of the God of his belief, which is quite an statement. And so this God created is a limited representation of the real. And this put us in front of the fact that all we come to know through analogy and all those discourses, ideas, currents, experiences that configurates our own experience and representation of the real and the meanings of reality are limited by our personal concreteness and the limitation. And in this passage, he says that it depends on our orientation if we tend towards this delimitation, if we identify, now I'm commenting on, it's not literal, if we are identifying with this limitation and we aim to reinforce them, to work to maintain those limits as the horizon of our self-development and knowledge of ourselves, or on the contrary, we aim to unlimit that, to become open to the infinite nature of the real's manifestation. So he used the word itlaq in contrast with taqyid. And so those are two orientations. And one could say that most people will mainly work to reinforce their identifications with a limited personal representation. So let's say that we can get obsessed by the apparent authorship of our adoration of the author of our belief, which is ourselves. So in a sense, people are adoring their own idol. While the other possibility, which is very essential in Ibn Arabi, is to receive this guidance through such people as Ibn Arabi himself, in order to get free from inwardly, in the heart, through the experience of opening love and inspiration to this unlimited nature of the unique becoming manifest in multiplicity. So this is what I meant by loving contemplation. If the heart can concentrate on this perception of reality as a permanent, always different disclosure of this unity, then this is an open path towards the realization of reality as it is, not restrained by the limits of our representation, our delimitation of the real. Well, I say that reality can be conceived symbolically as a book, so we are always deciphering, and this is why Ibn Arabi gives so much value to the idea of the tarjuman, of the interpreter. And he would talk, for example, in his Kitab al-Isfar, in this book of unveiling, he would discuss the idea of the Safar al-I'tibar, the journey of symbolical transposition, or if you want, the traveling of interpretation. So as receivers, as receptacles of consciousness and manifestation, we are always traveling. The heart itself is an organ, is a dimension, is a world, is the all-inclusive receiver of perception, but it can also be considered as traveling itself. The heart always fluctuating, symbolized by the 6 faces of the cube of the Kaaba, center of manifestation. This heart is always traveling. So one principle of this orientation towards the unlimited is to accept the providential, mysterious nature of reality, its essential ambivalence once it comes into the domain of multiplicity. So efforts to analyze things in terms of distance and separation are fruitful to distinguish things, to establish patterns, to know the differentiation of things, but in a sense are useless when it comes to travel into this movement beyond the differentiation. So we have this level of silence before the divine speech manifests in the presence of kun. So the heart is facing this domain of silence. At the same time, he's the receiver as a radio or as a computer. He's a receiver of all the waves, of all the rhythms, of all the patterns of manifestation. And both domains has to be integrated. And this is called by Ibn Arabi the path of a spring, bringing together the opposites. Now he has this wonderful experience of which he talks in his Diwan, where he is discussing the nature of poetry. And he had this contemplation in the imaginal realm where he was listening to a kind of song, to a kind of music, and he asked what was that, and he was saying that this was those were the angels writing with their pens, let's say the words, the names of everything to come to be, and this sounds was musical and coming in a rhythm of 2 or 3. I think in English, you say a compass, no? In this rhythmic pattern of 2 and 3, from which any other rhythm can be composed. But the fact is that they were numbers in this perception of the writing, the sound of the pens, writing all possible names of things to come. And he asked, what is this? And he was answered, this is the sama, this is the spiritual audition. So this is connected to sound. So we could say in modern language to waves, to frequencies, to rhythms. And he explicitly mentions the idea of iqa, rhythm. And he said, what is the relation of this poetry? He called that poetry to me. And the answer was, poetry, shi'ar, is the origin of everything. Or more literally, the origin, the root of all the ordering command, al-amr. So al-amr, which is the divine imperative, be, and things come to be, this command itself is identified with poetry, shi'ar. And as we know through many other writings of the Sheikh, through lexical root, this shi'ar would come to mean the perception of the hidden. And so the poet, which is a sha'ir, which is an active participle, comes to be, in that sense, the perceiver of the hidden nature of things. And this perception we see is connected to the hearing. So let's establish a relationship of this universal nature of poetry, of manifestation itself as God poetry, as a cosmic, very overwhelming qasida, with these two aspects of astonishing beauty and also amazing majesty. And if we think of reality as poetry and ourselves as receivers of poetry, let's say poets, in as much as we open to this perception of and recite together with the poem of reality, so poetry becomes our very experience. And let's say the poet would be that person open to reception and perception and recitation of the cosmic poem. Well, but what is is connected that to the principles I wanted to share about numbers? We know that in the Semitic appearance of the alphabet, letters and numbers came together, because as in Arabic, when at first letters were written in the abjad system, they were both numbers and letters simultaneously. You can think, for example, of the Roman numbers we use in general, and an X, which is the letter X, would be the number 10, okay? So in the same way, every Arabic letter immediately expresses a number. And this is not an strange esoteric effort for an Arabic speaker in the past, but it was everybody's experience that when they see the text, they are also facing numbers, and they would do operations with those letters, and they will order the chapters of a book with letters, etc. For example, when Ibn Arabi orders the poems of the Tarjuman, in the very old manuscripts, we have the number of each poem with letters. The number is written with letters, and obviously those letters are significant as letters and as numbers in relation to the context and the content of the poems. Okay, so this double nature of letters and numbers is an immediate experience for those trained in Arabic, especially in the past. Few people in our time are so familiar, so deeply immersed in this procedure, but it was a common feature, especially within the context of Sufism. So let's say that in a way, all Islamic tradition, but in particular Sufism, has been especially receptive to, among many other legacies of the ancient knowledge, to the main threads of what we could call Pythagorean tradition. Ibn Arabi explicitly refers, for example, to the Pythagorean inheritance of Ibn Masarra, one of his Andalusian masters. So this is very important because Pythagoreans, as well as Sufis who are immersed in this kind of contemplation of reality, they would give a very, very relevant value to numbers. And one of the aspects of this talk is that I would like you to accompany me in this beautiful contemplation of the nature of numbers, which is one of the objects of this seminar, right? And when I say numbers, of course, I mean proportions, I mean waves, I mean everything that is related to patterns and ultimately expressed as what is traditionally called spiritual geometry. And of course, spiritual is redundant in any case because everything is spiritual by nature. So the heart can consider the spiritual dimension of every manifestation. So there is nothing out of the scope of the spirit, right? So it depends of how things are contemplated. We can see them as bodily in a realm, of we can see them as purely spiritual expressions. It depends on the degrees of the particular contemplation. Because on the one hand, we have this essential uniqueness that is completely beyond any differentiation of degrees. But once we enter into the domain of speech, of divine speech and manifestation, and the written cosmos, then we have an endless number of degrees manifesting through this differentiation. And this matter of degrees is particularly connected to patterns and to numbers. So let's think that within this uniting domain of imagination, the imaginal realm, we can consider every possible thing to be known as the expression of a number. Ibn Arabi would say that everything has got a name that rules, that expresses the very essence of a particular individuation. Everything that can be perceived and known as a singularity, whether it is known as human or animal or vegetal or mineral or whatever any other concept we can imagine as an atom, as a wave, anything that can be individualized is in correspondence with a number, which is the expression of his inner name. Let's imagine that in the degrees of imagination, the higher degree, the highest degree of imagination is precisely the rhythm that is expressed in this writing of the pens as poetry. So essentially poetry is numerical rhythm, as we could say the same of music. Okay, music we distribute in an infinite number of scales. We can conceive as many proportions of sound as we, in the tradition, we have many scales, right? Pentatonic, heptatonic, etc. The question is that what is established in order to perceive and produce harmony is this symphony with the proportion, with the number. The same can be said because of this principle of analogy in the tradition, in the language of itself, in any possible science. It is a matter of perceiving patterns and degrees. So whether we consider the crystals or any stone, or we consider the planets associated to colors and to rhythm of spheres, or whether we consider colors, for example. Colors are relative perceptions, divisions we establish in between frequencies, right? So there are degrees in the scale of light, but those degrees can be established in many possible ways. So we have many languages appearing. So every human being ultimately has a singular language of himself associated to his representation, to the God created in his belief, but we all share a universal language that is very eminently expressed in the language of numbers, that is the most immediately universal one. So we can say, okay, Ibn Arabi is always facing the beauty and the amazing symbolical power of Arabic as the language of the Muhammadian revelation. For those familiar with this language and its mysteries, this is a very powerful symbolical domain. But I think it's important, and this is something that Ibn Arabi do not develop so much. He suggested, but he's not developing that in his writing. But I think in his circle of multiplicity, when he says, so because of the diversity of people in a diversity of time, and connected to a diversity of infinite diversity of theophanies, all peoples are receiving different revelations connected to all these principles of diversity. So I think we have to understand that this providential analogy, the underlying patterns that interconnect all realities, have to be perceived in any domain, in any language, in any tradition, in any experience. We know that in a way we can only know reality by perceiving patterns. Without this graduated relation of relative approaches of reality, we have no knowledge. Because knowledge is connected to alam, which is a signal. Signals establishing the differentiation of two lands of this path or the other. So the interpreter of the cosmos and the reciter of this poem of existence is operating within the rhythm, within the listening, the hearing, the perception of numerical patterns, which apply to any possible science. There is not such a thing as a science without patterns, without numbers. So arithmetics and the numbers themselves are perceived in this tradition, whether it is Pythagorean or Kabbalistic or Sufism, are perceived as the principles, the norms of knowledge and reality. Obviously, in the level of the ineffable, where pure uniqueness without differentiation is the matter, this differentiation of the arithmetical numbers do not apply anymore. So how do we integrate our traveling through the science, through the numbers in this realm with opening to a beyond where languages do not apply anymore as differentiations? And that's the mysterious nature of the heart, capable of adopting any forms, but also resonating with this essential, completely transcendent principle of pure love. Love being established in the domain of manifestation within the triad of the lover, the beloved, the love as an attribute, but also being the path of going to a beyond that implies a nowhere, because there is no place that can be differentiated. And nevertheless, this essential nowhere becomes uniquely manifested in every existent thing. Well, obviously, this is a path for the mind. Our minds are dispersed in so many discourses, so many possibilities, contrasting, because, for example, in our contemporary minds, we inherit a lot of discourses of ways that are completely towards the anomalous, that consider everything in a particular context as an anomaly, as something. Let's say that many aspects of even modern science are focusing on anomaly, on differentiation, on analysis towards the anomalous, and almost as if establishing analogies was a weak way of thinking. While on the contrary, we have this traditional orientation towards being immersed in the symbolical dynamic of numbers and patterns, becoming able to go beyond, to transcend them. So geometry, as a science of imagination, has this very efficient quality of opening our loving contemplation of the real in the heart. So the heart itself is conceived by Ibn Arabi as this cube within an sphere, as a very essential symbolism to open our consciousness to this possibility. Okay, this sphere whose center is the heart and may contain all possible patterns within. Well, so we have this approach to letters where Ibn Arabi would say, letters are an alive community, umma hayya. And from a modern idea of arbitrarity, signs are arbitrary, are conventional. So what would he mean, an alive community? Well, of course, for Ibn Arabi, in a sense, in a certain level, things can be considered as the result of our authorship, as conventions, etc. And even as arbitrary signs, why not? But this is a very low level of consciousness. Essentially, everything coming from this original poetry, everything in any language, in any context, any possibility in existence, is the expression of the divine creativity. It is providential and is fully meaningful. So everything being perceived in every consciousness is a truthful perception of one aspect of the real manifesting. Of course, everything being delimited in consciousness can also be said to be not the truth, because it's being a limitation. Is from that point of view, it is not a perception of opening towards the reality, the intrinsic reality. So we have this ambivalence of being, not being the truth of every belief, of every moment of perception. But essentially, ultimately, everything is a truthful experience of the real. from this perspective, if we harmonize as poets of this reality with the numerical nature of things, with the proportions, with the underlying patterns of music, and the beauty it provides, and this sense of hearing the inherent harmony of every moment of manifestation in our perception, then we open to the domain of the implicit, the underlying, the sustaining, the always underlying silence. This nature of the name As-Samad, the support for all manifestation, a support that cannot be any particular differentiation, but is indivisible because it's beyond this differentiation of a speech in this realm of Kun. Okay, so Ibn Arabi is orientating our symbolical perception in this journey, and so, of course, letters are alive and providential, as we could imagine waves being alive, light in this endless movement of traveling, being alive, being a name of God himself. So if we open to something we immediately do, but if we recognize that we are always establishing analogies and receiving interconnections of things through patterns and how this operates in the level of numbers, then we are open to understand the mysteries of the alphabet and the writing as Ibn Arabi faced it. And we can understand how every vowel, every movement, every interrelation of words will be highly significant because it's always the expression of a providential symbolization of the real. So obviously we feel limited because we say, oh, well, I don't have these traditional sciences, or I don't know this or the other language. Of course, each of us has a particular approach to imagination. We have been receiving an enormous amount of images and knowledges, signs, alam, of all these knowledges have been providentially expressed and given specifically to us, to our singularity. So of course, the way in which we are going to deal with these sciences is always personal, but we are resonating with all humankind of any time. And so my consideration here is that we fear to be, because of our sensation of ignorance, we fear to contemplate the knowledge that will manifest in us through this contemplation, because we say, oh, I'm so limited, I know that, but I don't really know. We are so fixed in our limitations that we do not let inspiration to flow through us in our heart. So my final consideration will be to let the language to talk to us through this. I haven't had the time to talk about the roots, but to talk to us through the form of the words, through their etymology, through the lexical roots in Arabic or in any other language, if something similar happens, through the ideograms, if we come to know this in Chinese or any other language. If we consider that in any realm, the real is talking to us in any particular language, then we are traveling through this symbolical transposition of meanings within the providential place that has been given to us, which is our own heart. So in a sense, we can fear our ignorance, but I would say that what we can fear the most is not to be open to receive the knowledge that is provided to us in our singularity. So instead of fearing, let's contemplate within the framework of love. That's how I perceive Ibn Arabi's teaching in the sense of understanding more of letters, numbers, and roots. And thank you very much.